To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
In November 2008, 24-year-old Arpana Jinaga was found murdered inside of her Redmond, Washington apartment, just hours after attending a Halloween party with neighbors in her building. Arpana was a bright, accomplished software engineer without any enemies, yet the crime scene was chaotic and filled with conflicting forensic clues. Despite multiple suspects, extensive DNA testing, and even a criminal trial, her killer has never been identified. This is Forensic Tales, episode 311, The Murder of Arpana Jinaga. Before diving into the Halloween party and the events that led to her death, it's important to understand who Arpana Jinaga was and why so many people describe her loss as not only devastating, but extremely unfair. Arpana grew up in India, the oldest of two daughters in a family that valued education. Her father was a computer engineering professor. Her mom stayed at home with the kids. Ever since Arpana was little, she wanted to follow in her dad's footsteps. And I think that says a lot about the kind of little girl that she was. Not many young girls want to grow up to become engineers. But Arpana was different. She had always been naturally good at school and gravitated toward computers. By the time she was a teenager, she was already participating in national and international design competitions. One of her projects, which was a communications blocking device that she had built for a microchip design contest, earned her recognition as one of the top performers among thousands of kids across the world. But school wasn't her only gift. She also loved art, writing, gymnastics, and taekwondo. Friends said she was someone who threw herself into everything she was interested in. She wasn't the type of person to just do something with one foot out the door. If she wanted to do something, she was all in. She was also someone her two younger siblings looked up to. Her younger sister even studied engineering just to follow in her footsteps. After completing her undergraduate degree in India, Arpana moved to the United States to attend Rutgers University in New Jersey. This was something that her dad really wanted for her. He knew how smart and talented she was, and he thought the U.S. would give her much more opportunity. So that's what she did. In 2007, she got her master's degree in electrical and computer engineering. But instead of going back to India, she decided to stay in the States. And eventually, she got a job in Washington State with EMC. Not surprisingly, she instantly stood out as a star employee. She was bright, she was dedicated, and clearly, she was headed to bigger and better things. By the fall of 2008, she had already been promoted. When Arpana moved to Redmond, which was a tech hub just outside Seattle, she was starting completely fresh. She didn't have any family nearby. She didn't have any friends. She was brand new to the area. But none of that seemed to stop or intimidate her. She was able to build a community almost immediately. And a lot of that had to do with her decision to live at that apartment complex, the Valley View apartment buildings. She made friends with a lot of her neighbors there. Everyone found Arpana really easy to get along with. She was friendly, she was curious, and she was willing to try almost anything. I think that type of spirit played a big part in her decision to buy a motorcycle despite never having ridden one before. She wanted a motorcycle, she set her mind to it, so that's what she did. She joined a local riding club, took safety courses, and spent weekends exploring Washington streets with her new motorcycle friends. Now, you might think that between work, learning to ride a motorcycle would have kept her pretty busy, but she did more. She also volunteered with the Redmond Fire Department, helped at local animal shelters, talked about wanting to open a sanctuary someday, and she kept up with her love of music and martial arts. So I think it's fair to say that this young woman lived a very active and full life. She didn't waste even a single day. By 24, she had already accomplished more than a lot of people hope to achieve in a lifetime. She was building a life filled with purpose and adventure. But then on Halloween night 2008, something went terribly wrong in the apartment complex she had come to call home. It was October 31st, 2008, a Friday. The entire Valley View apartment complex was buzzing. People were excited it was Halloween, and they were even more excited that the holiday fell on a Friday night. So people were excited, ready to have a good time that night. That morning started like any other. Arpana got up, went to work like she always did. And while she was there, she mentioned to a few coworkers that several of her neighbors were hosting an informal multi-apartment party later that night. So after work, she stopped by the store to pick up a few decorations before heading home to get ready. Now, that night, at least 3 apartments, including Arpana's, kept their doors open so people could come in and out. And over the course of the next several hours, more than 24 people circulated between the units. Some of them were coworkers, others were neighbors who lived in the complex, friends of friends. It was a lot of people going in and out. And no one really kept track of who was who or which person was in which apartment at any given time. You have to keep in mind, this is Halloween night. People are probably drinking, they're dressed up in costumes, they're having a good time. So people aren't really paying attention to who's doing what. But as we're about to talk about, this would eventually become a major problem for detectives. At one point during the night, some people recalled a brief disagreement between Arpana and another partygoer. The exchange reportedly stemmed from an inappropriate comment the man made, but it wasn't anything too serious. Apparently, after this brief disagreement, Arpana went about her business and seemed to be enjoying herself. She didn't let it ruin her night. So the people who witnessed this didn't think too much about it. By about 3 o'clock in the morning, things were winding down, and several people remembered seeing Arpana leave a first-floor apartment where the final group had gotten together. They saw her walk back upstairs to her own unit, which was on the 3rd floor. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. For the next hour or two, some of Arpana's neighbors heard sounds they believed were consensual, muffled voices and moaning noises coming from her unit. They all just assumed she had a boyfriend over. Then sometime around 8 a.m., another neighbor woke up to what he later described as a strange, low growling sound coming from her apartment. It only lasted for about 20 seconds and ended with a heavy thump. He also remembered hearing the sound of water running, water that seemed to run for about an hour. At the time, he just dismissed it. He didn't think anything of it. If you have ever lived in an apartment before, then you know you hear strange noises all the time. Only later did investigators consider whether those noises marked the moment when Arpana was attacked and when her killer began destroying evidence. These little bits of information, movement between apartments, a late night return home, unexplained early morning sounds, would become some of the most debated parts of this case. Because after this Halloween night, Arpana would never be seen alive again. Although she was thousands of miles away, Arpana always stayed in contact with her family back in India. They spoke almost every single day, and they had even spoken to her the night before the Halloween party. So when her family didn't hear from her for the rest of the weekend, they knew something was off. And by off, I mean Arpana never answered a single phone call. Not on Saturday, not on Sunday, not on Monday morning. When she didn't show up for work on Monday morning, her coworkers started reaching out to her as well. For her to miss work without calling, that was unheard of. That was never something she would do. Meanwhile, her family in India reached out to a trusted family friend who lived in the area. He had once been a student of Arpana's dad and now worked as a professor in Washington. They asked him to go to her apartment and check on her. He got to the complex around 9 a.m. A neighbor who lived near Arpana happened to be nearby, and together they walked to her unit. But when they knocked on the door, they were surprised to see that it was partially open. And not only that, but the door frame had been damaged, a clear and immediate sign that something wasn't right. Inside, the apartment didn't look right either. The place just looked like there had been a struggle or a fight. But then they got to the bedroom, and that's when they found her. She was on the floor and already showing signs of decomposition, so the family friend immediately called 911. Dispatchers instructed both men to leave the apartment and wait outside for officers to arrive. Police responded quickly and secured the building. And over the next several hours, detectives and crime scene technicians from the Washington State Police arrived to document the scene. Early observations suggested a violent struggle and possible sexual assault, but investigators released very few details publicly at the time. What happened inside that apartment between the early morning hours of November 1st and the discovery on November 3rd would go on to become the central mystery. One that investigators have struggled to answer for more than 15 years. In the days after Arpana's body was found, the shock was felt far beyond her apartment building. Friends, coworkers, neighbors, even people who had only recently met her gathered in Redmond for a memorial. It was a tribute that blended local customs with a tradition of her Hindu faith. I think this was a reflection of just how quickly she had built a community for herself. Her body was later flown home to India, where her family faced an unthinkable loss. They weren't just mourning their eldest daughter, they were grieving a young woman who had crossed continents to build a life filled with possibility, who had already accomplished so much, and who seemed destined to do even more. In the months that followed, the motorcycle club she had joined organized rides in her honor, visiting places she had loved exploring. For many, the tributes were a way to remember her as she truly was, happy, curious, ambitious. For her family on the other side of the world, hearing how deeply she had touched others in such a short time must have brought a small measure of comfort. Back inside the apartment, detectives were busy trying to put the pieces together. But one thing was crystal clear. What happened inside wasn't random or impulsive. It was violent, prolonged, and followed by an intense effort to erase forensic evidence. Starting with the front door had been forced open with enough strength to actually break the frame, despite both the doorknob lock and deadbolt being engaged. Once inside, there were signs of a struggle virtually everywhere. And according to Arpana's friends and neighbors, she always kept the place clean and tidy. But now, the place was a complete mess. The mess seemed to continue down the hallway and into the bedroom, where her body was found on the floor next to her bed. She was naked, she was very bloody, and she showed signs of a very violent assault. The autopsy later confirmed sexual trauma. The autopsy also confirmed other details, such as how she was killed. She had been strangled to death roughly 2 days before her body was discovered. The medical examiner estimated her time of death to be somewhere between 3 and 8 a.m. on November 1st. But it wasn't just being strangled. Arpana was quite literally attacked. She showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head. Several of her teeth were missing. She'd been gagged with her own underwear. She had duct tape placed across her mouth. She had been completely brutalized by this person. Something else about the apartment stood out. The smell. It was the smell of some type of harsh chemical, suggesting whoever did this tried to clean up. In fact, bleach had been wiped on furniture and the living room table, where liquid had dripped into the carpet and left it permanently discolored. There were even drops of bleach that led down the hall toward the bedroom, creating a path that investigators believed traced the killer's movements through the unit. Beyond the chemical smell, there was something else: motor oil. Oil had been poured around the entire bedroom and onto the carpet. Some of it had even been dumped directly on Arpana's body. While searching the apartment complex, the police found an empty bottle of Castrol motor oil inside a plastic bag inside of a dumpster. The bag also contained Arpana's Halloween costume. She was dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood, a blood-stained bathrobe, and bedding that was missing from the crime scene. Inside the bathroom, police found a white comforter soaking in a mixture of water and bleach. It was like someone had tried to wash the blood out of it. And it wasn't just the use of bleach. Other items, Arpana's blanket, parts of her Halloween costume, a black sheet, even pieces of carpet, showed signs of being burned. This person went to extreme lengths to try and destroy any and all possible traces of forensic evidence. They had some knowledge of how crime scene evidence works, and they really didn't want to get caught. So they did any and everything they could possibly think of to try and destroy it. Everywhere you look right now, people are talking about weight loss medications. It's the buzz at brunch, your group chats, and even at your doctor's office. But do you know if weight loss medications are right for you? Enter Hers. Weight loss by Hers is realistic, not restrictive. Hers provides access to affordable weight loss plans built around oral medication kits and GLP-1 injectable options. With oral medication kits starting at just $69 per month with a 10-month plan when paid up front. Whether you want to lose weight, grow thicker, fuller hair, or find relief for anxiety, Hers has you covered. Visit forhers.com/tales to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's forhers.com/tales. forhers.com/tales. Weight loss by Hers is not available everywhere. Compounded drug products are not approved or evaluated for safety, effectiveness, or quality by the FDA. Prescription required. See website for full details, important safety information, and restrictions. Actual price depends on product and plan purchased. Within days, dozens of items from the apartment were shipped to the Washington State Crime Lab for testing. But scientists warned the detectives that the workload would be a lot because of the extensive mixture of fluid, chemicals, even burned material. Processing the evidence could take weeks, months. This wasn't your typical crime scene evidence. There was something else about the crime that didn't seem to make much sense. Arpana's motorcycle wasn't parked where it usually was. So that made them wonder, was this some type of robbery? As a homicide detective, you have to explore every possible motive. But that theory was short-lived. Detectives found out that the bike had been at a repair shop in Everett since before the party. So the missing bike didn't have anything to do with her murder. But that doesn't mean other items weren't missing. One of Arpana's ID cards, her BlackBerry cell phone, and her digital camera, those items were all missing from the apartment. None of them were ever found. If you look at all these items, they're all personal. ID cards, cell phone, camera. These are all personal items that belonged to the victim. So I think the police wondered whether the killer might have taken them intentionally, possibly to conceal something captured on them. I don't know what else to make of that because nothing else valuable had been taken from the apartment, just those items. Stepping back, the apartment says two things. One, this was a brutal attack. And two, there was a massive attempt to destroy evidence. But it also left behind an unexpected trail. One filled with DNA. As forensic testing moved forward, investigators began zeroing in on one particular party guest, 27-year-old Emmanuel Fair. Now, Fair wasn't necessarily a household name, but he was well known to law enforcement. Before this case, he had been arrested multiple times for a number of different crimes, drug cases, weapon charges, and most notably, a sexual assault involving a teenage victim. Over the course of his 27 short years on Earth, he served several years in prison and was required to register as a sex offender. So as you can see, this dude isn't exactly a great guy. By 2008, Fair didn't have a stable place to call home. He spent most of his time couch surfing at different friends' homes, including an apartment in Arpana's complex. He sometimes stayed with a woman named Leslie. When police first interviewed her, she denied he had been staying there, but they already knew that was a lie. They had information that Fair was staying there at the time, so it's unclear why exactly this woman tried to lie about it. Detectives also learned that Fair had attended that Halloween party. He was captured in multiple photos taken by neighbors and other guests. Also, several people remember him talking with Arpana that night. They didn't have a long conversation, but they did talk. He also spent time with CJ, the neighbor who later helped discover her body, an interaction that would draw added scrutiny once the investigation deepened. When detectives first spoke with Fair on November 21st, 2008, he admitted he had gone to Arpana's apartment that night. He said they chatted, looked at some photos on her computer, and then he left. At the time, police had no physical evidence tying him to the murder, and his story largely matched what the other partygoers described. But because of his criminal history, investigators didn't rule him out. That changed when the Washington State Crime Lab began returning results. Over the next 2 years, analysts identified what prosecutors described as significant DNA associations between Fair and several key items from the scene, including tape used as a gag, biological material found on Arpana's neck, and a blood-stained robe recovered in the dumpster. To detectives, these results suggested Fair had come into physical contact with the items linked to the attack and the possible cleanup. Prosecutors also pointed to Fair's phone activity in the early morning hours of November 1st. Fair claimed he returned to Leslie's apartment around 1 a.m. and went to sleep. But phone records showed that he made multiple calls between 2 and 5 o'clock, including calls to Leslie herself. This seems to have undermined his timeline and raises questions about where he actually was during the window of the murder. By October 2010, nearly 2 years after the crime, King County prosecutors filed charges of first-degree murder against Emmanuel Fair. At the announcement, Senior Deputy Prosecutor Jeff Bard told reporters that the forensic evidence supported the theory that Fair entered Arpana's locked apartment, assaulted and strangled her, and attempted to wipe away his presence afterward. He also said they intended to seek a life sentence against him. But even faced with spending the rest of his life in prison, Fair stuck to his guns. He said he was innocent. He didn't murder Arpana that night. As the case moved toward trial, Emmanuel Fair's defense team argued that investigators had singled him out early on and treated him differently from the other potential suspects. They claimed racial bias influenced the investigation, that Fair, a black man with a criminal record, was looked at more aggressively than white neighbors who were also at the party, and whose DNA appeared on multiple items inside of the apartment. To them, it was a classic case of racial bias, something that unfortunately happens in our criminal justice system sometimes. But the issue that stalled the case for years wasn't just investigative bias. It was the forensic technology behind the state's DNA evidence. Washington investigators used a software program called True Allele, a type of probabilistic genotyping that analyzes complex, mixed DNA samples using advanced algorithms. It's been used nationwide, especially in cases where traditional DNA testing can't determine which contributors are present. In Arpana's case, most of the items that were tested contained mixtures for multiple people. The state crime lab could say Fair might be a contributor, but the results weren't conclusive. When the evidence was run through True Allele, however, the software produced much better results. Those results, according to prosecutors, showed Fair was millions of times more likely to have contributed key DNA than any other unrelated person. But Fair's defense wasn't willing to accept those results without seeing exactly how the program reached them. So they filed multiple motions demanding access to the software's source code, the underlying formulas this program uses to interpret DNA. But Cybergenetics, the company behind this program, refused, saying the code was proprietary and that releasing it would expose trade secrets. As you can imagine, that disagreement launched a very lengthy legal battle. Years passed as the defense and prosecution litigated whether the software's inner workings should be disclosed. In the end, Cybergenetic won. The code remained sealed. But here's the truth. All of these delays meant Emmanuel Fair stayed in jail for nearly a decade before a jury ever decided the case. Emmanuel Fair finally went to trial in February 2017, more than 8 years after Arpana's murder and 6 years after being first charged. Here was the state's case. They argued that Fair became obsessed with Arpana during the Halloween party, and that his changing story about where he was between 2 and 5 a.m. pointed to deception. They honed in on his dozens of phone calls during that time window, calls Fair claimed not to remember, along with a voicemail one woman described as sounding like someone moving around but not speaking. But the backbone of the state's case was DNA. According to prosecutors, Fair's DNA was found on several key items: tape used as a gag, biological material from Arpana's neck, and a blood-stained robe found in the dumpster. Much of this analysis comes from True Loyal, marking the first time Washington used the program in a criminal trial. The state also suggested Fair might not have acted alone, hinting that Arpana's neighbor, identified through the investigation as CJ, could have participated. They argued that even if evidence implicated CJ, it didn't clear Fair. Now, for the defense's case. They said that the crime scene contained DNA from multiple people, including neighbors who had not even been at that Halloween party. Some of that DNA evidence was semen. Semen from another man was found on a towel near her body. They also argued that Fair had injured his lip at the party inside of Arpana's apartment, a fact confirmed by other guests, and had gone into her bathroom to clean up. That alone, they said, could explain why his DNA turned up in multiple places. The defense also questioned the reliability of the investigation itself, pointing to delays in processing evidence, the late discovery of key items in the dumpster, and the fact that detectives spent nearly 2 years before settling on Fair as their primary suspect. At one point, even consulting a psychic for leads. And if prosecutors truly believed a second person was involved, the defense argued, that only added reasonable doubt. Fair was the only one on trial. After weeks of testimony, the jury struggled to reach a decision. Early in deliberations, they leaned 9-3 toward acquittal. And when the judge sent them back to continue discussing the case, they eventually deadlocked at 6-6. Several jurors reportedly believed that the neighbor, CJ, might have played a role. With no unanimous verdict, the judge declared a mistrial. But that's not the end of this story. Prosecutors quickly said they planned to retry the case, and a new trial was scheduled for September of 2017. But days before it was set to begin, the Court of Appeals agreed to review issues raised by the defense, putting the retrial on hold yet again. After the mistrial, the focus shifted once again to CJ. CJ lived directly beside Arpana, knew her well, and admitted he had been drinking at the Halloween party. He also acknowledged being attracted to her, hoping that something would happen that night. He told police he went to sleep around midnight, but phone records showed he called Arpana twice between 2:56 and 3:02. Just minutes before neighbors heard moaning coming from her apartment. When confronted with the call logs, he claimed he didn't remember making them. A neighbor returning home around 3 a.m. reported seeing a man who did not match Fair's description standing in Arpana's doorway. Interestingly enough, the physical description aligned much more closely with CJ. Then there were his actions the next morning. While claiming he slept until 10 a.m., records showed he was online printing directions to local pawn shops. Something investigators found strange because Arpana's cell phone and her digital camera were missing. Later that day, he drove toward the Canadian border and attempted to cross without a passport. When turned away, he went to a gathering with friends, arriving with a noticeable limp he later couldn't explain. Over the next few days, some of CJ's friends said he made some weird comments. wondering if he had gone into Arpana's apartment in his sleep. And at one point, even asking someone whether he could have killed her. But there might be an explanation behind those strange comments. At the time, he had recently stopped taking his prescribed psychiatric medication. So maybe that could explain it. From a forensic standpoint, CJ's DNA also appeared on several items tied to the cleanup effort, including the bottle of motor oil used to cover Arpana's body and a bloody robe found in the dumpster. True allele analysis later indicated that he too could not be excluded as a contributor. But despite all of these red flags, CJ was never charged. It was just Emmanuel Fair. Fair's second trial finally began in 2019, with prosecutors once again relying on the DNA evidence. On the other hand, the defense focused on raising reasonable doubt. They continue to argue that CJ was the better suspect based on his behavior, proximity, and the physical evidence tying him to the scene. CJ testified at the second trial, but he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights on many questions. And unlike the first trial, jurors were not told that he had previously been described as a potential accomplice. After several days of deliberation, initially split evenly among guilty, not guilty, and undecided, the jury reached a verdict on June 11, 2019. Not guilty. Emmanuel Fair was acquitted and walked free after spending nearly a decade in jail awaiting trial. With that decision, no one has ever been convicted of Arpana's murder. More than 15 years later, the case remains open but unsolved. Investigators are left with a crime scene saturated in DNA, so much so that it became almost impossible to interpret. Dozens of people had been inside the apartment in the hours before Arpana was killed. Multiple contributors were found on key items. Advanced software pointed in one direction, traditional testing raised doubts. And the people who lived closest to Arpana, whose behavior drew intense scrutiny, was never charged. The overwhelming amount of forensic material, instead of providing clarity, created a maze. It showed who might have been present, but not who committed the murder. The science could suggest possibilities, but it couldn't deliver certainty. Today, Arpana's family is still waiting for answers. Detectives continue to review the case, but unless new technology or new information comes forward, the evidence remains as tangled and conflicting as it was back in 2008. Arpana Jinaga was a brilliant, compassionate young woman with a bright future. Her death shocked everyone who knew her, and the unresolved questions surrounding her final hours still haunt this investigation. This case is a stark reminder that even in modern forensic science, DNA doesn't always tell a simple story. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you would like to help create compelling new cases, fund research, and assist with production and editing costs, you can support the show with a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll be one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers: Tony A., Sherry A., Nicola, Megan G., Urelli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Lois B., Lynn H., Danielle D., Lucretia W., Brett R., Luz Raquel, and Courtney C. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at Courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening and see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.